All right, Alexander, let's discuss what happened in the first round of the French elections. Macron got around 28%, Le Pen around 24, a little over 24, I think, were her numbers. Mélenchon got 20. Zemmour was at around, what was it, like 7, 8%, something like that. And we're going to head to the second round on the 24th of April. The last poll that I saw had Macron winning in the second round against Le Pen with 51%, just barely winning.
Yeah.
That's the last
Yeah.
most recent
Yes.
poll that I saw.
Yes.
But I mean, we've got
Yes.
2 weeks until we
We
get
got.
to the final results, so we have some time. Zemmour came out with a statement and said, called on all his voters to support Le Pen. So he came out quickly and threw his support behind Le Pen. Mélenchon threw his support, it seems that he threw his support behind Macron, or at least he told his supporters not to vote for Le Pen because Le Pen is still being branded as far right. And Macron is going to use that like he did in the last elections to brand her far right, and hopefully that will take him to another win. Where are we with France after the first round of elections?
I think this is looking extremely brittle and very thin for the French establishment. I want to make it very clear. I still think, on balance, Macron will win, and I think that they will pull out every stop to make him win, and I think they're going to try to increase the margin of his victory beyond what you said in the opinion polls. But having said that, it's far from certain, and they're going to have to work very, very hard to make that happen. And Le Pen, for her part, has possibilities and things to fight for. Let me give you what are the actual results, because we've now got the actual official results. So Macron got 27.6, which, as I'm going to say, I think is actually low for an incumbent president at this stage of an election, in this sort of election. Le Pen got 23.41. Mélenchon got 21.95. In other words, he almost got 22. He's just off 22%. And Zemmour got 7. Now, if you add together Le Pen's vote and Zemmour's vote, then that gives a right-wing vote, the kind of people who would have voted for Le Pen, of 30%. Now, I have often said in previous videos, or at least I've just suggested in previous videos, that the whole point about the Zemmour exercise was to split the right-wing vote and to make it more difficult, perhaps even for Le Pen to get into the second round, and perhaps open the way for Valérie Pécresse of the Republican Party, the centrist party, who has been very, very heavily promoted this year. Well, you can see that on the one hand, if that was the plan, and I would stress, not suggesting Zemmour himself was part of that plan, but you don't become a presidential candidate in France without a lot of backing from people in the French media and within the political system, at least not if you're a total outsider, as Zemmour was. Well, if that was the plan, it has sort of failed. It has failed because we saw that in the end, the right-wing vote did consolidate around Le Pen, and she's actually improved on her vote over the previous election in 2017. So she's actually increased her vote in the first round from 21% to just over 23%. And so Zemmour wasn't in the end able to weaken Le Pen. But consider that if Zemmour hadn't been a candidate, there is a real possibility that Le Pen might have equaled or even surpassed Macron in the first round, because all those 7% of votes which went for Zemmour are now going to go to Le Pen. Now, that's the first round. So, I mean, it looks brittle, but it looks, Macron's victory looks brittle. And there is some suggestion that there's been some manipulation to achieve it. But it's what has happened with the candidates just below the the big two, because Macron's got 27%, 27.6%. Marine Le Pen has got 23.4%. But the candidate who came third is Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Now, Mélenchon is basically the person who's rebuilding the French left, and he got almost 22%. And then below him is Zemmour with 7%. Now, the parties, the candidates from the establishment parties, who you can be absolutely 100% sure are going to back Macron in the second round, are the Republicans, Valérie Pécresse's bunch, who were once the dominant party in France. They've got less than 5%. And the Socialist Party, the once dominant French Socialist Party, which got less than 2%. I mean, it's become an absolute marginal force. Add together Pécresse and the Socialist votes with Macron's vote, and he comes nowhere close to the necessary margin to win. So it all depends on what happens now with that big block of voters, 22%, who voted for Mélenchon. Now, Mélenchon didn't tell them to vote for Macron. He told them not to vote for Le Pen. So that basically leaves open all kinds of possibilities. Will they listen to what he says, first of all? Because in terms of economic policy, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of actual policy issues, they are much closer to Le Pen than they are to Macron. So perhaps some of them will vote for Le Pen in preference to Macron. Perhaps some of them will abstain. We just don't know at this stage. I mean, Mélenchon's endorsement of Macron wasn't really an endorsement at all. And it is all now very, very much up in the air. And it reminds me a little bit, and I want to be very cautious here, but it reminds me a little bit of what happened in that other big change election in France, which is the one in 1981, where the top candidate was Giscard d'Estaing, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, the French president, who got 28%, much the same vote that Macron has. Then came Mitterrand, the leader of the French Socialist Party, who got 25%. And then came Chirac, Jacques Chirac, who was a right-wing candidate, winning 20%. Now, again, most people assumed that that block of supporters, of right-wing voters who voted for Chirac, would go over to Giscard to keep the socialist out. But instead, they split. And in fact, it was Mitterrand who won. So it could be, there's just a chance, a greater chance than there's ever been in any French election since 1981, that we could actually see an upset in this election. It really comes down to this. Do Mélenchon's very strongly left-wing voters, I mean, they believe in, dirigist economic policies. They're skeptical about support for Ukraine. They are hostile to NATO. They're hostile to the EU. Do they go with Le Pen, who is much closer to them on all those issues? Or do they swallow Macron, arrogant, out of touch, aloof, as it's known they find him, pursuing neoliberal, integrationist, Europeanist, Atlanticist policies? So does the label that's been attached to Le Pen, is it still so potent that it deters Mélenchon's voters from voting for her? And I think it's a very big question. France is a complex society. The mood in France, as we've been saying, program after program, is extremely bad. I think because of the structural and historical realities of French society, enough Mélenchon voters will turn out and support Macron in the end to see him through. But I don't think it's a foregone conclusion.
Right. They'll support Macron because of two factors, maybe three. Macron's the incumbent, so you say there's going to be a certain amount of people that are just going to tick the incumbent box. Okay, we understand that. That's common in every election. The immigration issue, which is what they're going to hit Le Pen with very, very hard, because they can't really dig into the fact that she wants out of the EU. Supposedly she's anti-EU and supposedly she's anti-NATO. We really don't know. This is the impression that we sometimes get with Le Pen, but she's tried to water down that stance and then she's brought it back up again. I just don't think it's that solid anymore, her anti-EU, anti-NATO stance. I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem like it was what it used to be, say, 6 years ago. It's been watered down some. And of course, they don't want to have that label of far right, which is silly when you consider that France, supports right now the most far right elements in Ukraine that you could possibly think of. But anyway, this is the world that we live in. So just because of these three issues, you may get another Macron as president. And what would that mean for France if Macron were to come out and win?
Yeah, what it would mean is an accumulating crisis in France, because that's what the results of this election show. I mean, the establishment parties, the old establishment parties, the socialists and the Republicans, the centre-right party, the Republicans, the party originally created by General de Gaulle in the 60s, the party of Pompidou and of Chirac, that has collapsed. I mean, that's now polling at less than, its candidate, Valérie Pécresse, is polling at less than 5%. The Socialist Party, the party of François Mitterrand, before that, going all the way back to Mendes France in the 50s, going back further still, you could really trace it all the way back to Jean Jaurès in the 19th century, that has collapsed. It's polling at less than 2%. What you are seeing in France is a massive upswell of anger. So people are now voting in larger numbers for Le Pen, and I'm going to come to Le Pen in a moment and what she stands for and what she's going to do, but they're voting in larger numbers for Le Pen than they've ever done in the first round. They're voting for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is in effect recreating the French left as a hard left. He's basically looking back to many of the old traditions of the French left, the French Communist Party as it once was, things of that kind. And of course, we see that there's now been a significant vote, not a huge one, but still a significant one, for someone like Eric Zemmour. So put all these forces together, and you get actually an actual majority, I think it's fair to say, in France, of people who are incredibly hostile to the current direction of policies in France, who don't like the integrationist policies the French elite is foisting on France, who are incredibly angry about the economic situation in France, and who sense the reality that France is going wrong, that the economy is in a bad way, that French society is being undermined from within, all of those things. And yet, and this is, I think, the real key, the ideological labels that are attached to these people are making it all but impossible for this majority, which exists and which doesn't like the current situation and is becoming increasingly angry about it. This majority is finding it impossible to unite, or incredibly difficult to unite, because of the ideological labels that are arbitrarily stuck on certain parts of this potentially winning coalition. And it's very difficult to see how this is sustainable for very much longer. And it seems to me that if we get a re-election of Macron, and a continuation of Macronism, which I'm sure we will if he's re-elected. He's going to continue exactly as before because he will see it as a vindication. Then what we will see at some point, not very long, is a smash. If there's any doubt at all that France is now heading towards a crisis, this election really buries that. Clearly, there is a massive repudiation in France of the current direction of policy. But the French elite are clinging on by exploiting the divisions, and they're not only just exploiting the divisions, they are pressing ahead with their project, even as French society crystallizes in hostility against them. And can I just say, I talked about the situation in France being very bad. It's important to stress that, bad as it is, the crisis that we've seen, the global crisis that we've seen, has not yet hit France as hard as it's going to do, or as it is hitting some other countries. The latest inflation readout in the Netherlands shows inflation there currently running at 12%. 12%. In the Netherlands, it's at double digits. In France, it's between 5 and 6%. And the reason it's only at between 5 and 6% is apparently, or so I'm told, because France, because it gets so much of its energy from nuclear power, still hasn't seen these huge surges in energy fuel prices, which we are bound before very long to start to see in France as well. So France is heading towards a crisis, a big political crisis. I've lived through them. I saw my mother was caught up. She was right in France, in Paris in 1968. She saw what happened then. But France is heading towards a political crisis. But the French elite clings on because the divisions amongst its opponents. And I'm going to say something else, because of Marine Le Pen's failure to establish herself as a decisive political figure. Now, that is asking a great deal of any one person. But, I have to say this. I think that she's not been able to transcend the divisions in French society, at least not up to now. She's done it to a great extent by softening her positions. And I think that there is a great deal of skepticism about what she would do as President of France, and it's a skepticism that I share. So I can't help but think that if she does break through and does become President of France, I think a lot of people will be very, very disappointed, or could end up being very disappointed, because they may find that she isn't really the huge break that many of them expected or hoped she would be.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, I would say that I'm more of the perspective that, yes, Le Pen, just because it's not Macron, and maybe she'll provide something marginally better or marginally different. I think the fact that she watered down her message instead of going deeper into her message and becoming a stronger believer in her cause, whatever cause that was, you don't have to agree with it or not. It showed that she had a lack of conviction and faith, and instead she seemed to water down her message in order to please the Brussels kleptocrats, the EU kleptocrats. So why doesn't Le Pen then? Because she's obviously nervous about doubling or tripling down on her previous policy stances, controversial they may be, but it did give her a certain gravitas and popularity. Because she's nervous to do that and she wants to be more in the middle, more of a centrist, why doesn't she also play the identity game with Macron? In other words, why doesn't Le Pen brand Macron as a globalist? Why doesn't she brand Macron as a fascist? As a matter of fact, isn't neoliberalism just a fancy word for fascism when you get down to the very basic definition of it? I mean, neoliberalism is pretty much the same exact thing if you get to the basic definition of the two. And why doesn't she dig into Macron for his support of the Nazis in Ukraine? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, because it seems like in the past, there was a saying in the U.S., people vote because of the economy. It's the economy, stupid. That's why people vote. That saying in the U.S. during elections. I think that carries over to most every country, or it used to. It seems now in in 2022 since 2020, the economy seems to be second to this virtue signaling identity politics game that we have playing in many countries, and it seems that it's very strong in France as well.
It is exceptionally strong in France. And of course, you've got to understand that in France, it's particularly strong because of the historical legacy, the legacy of the French Revolution, which has created deep-seated divisions in French society, which have never completely been erased. And of course, also the divisions that were created by the Second World War. So it's even stronger in France, in my opinion, than it is in many other countries. But the reason Le Pen has not done that, the reason she's not strengthened her message in the kind of way that she has, is because she doesn't have it in her. I mean, I'm sorry to say it in that straightforward way, but that's the truth. I mean, you are asking Le Pen to be a transcendental figure, a colossal political leader. Well, she isn't. I mean, to my mind, that's blindingly obvious. If she was, she would have run politics in France in a completely different way. I mean, you're asking her to be Georges Clemenceau, if you go back in French history, or Raymond Poincaré, or Jean Jaurès, just to give people from different parts of the French political, landscape, left and right. But I mean, she's not. She's a French she's a French politician. She originates from the Le Pen family, which has anchored her, if you like, on the right. But I don't think ultimately and fundamentally she has the will or the nous or the appetite to engineer that kind of change that you're talking about and that run politics in the sort of way that you're saying. Now, I'm not, rushing to conclusions about her. I'm not saying that she's somebody who lacks convictions. I mean, I'm prepared always to wait and see what somebody does when they do become president. But I mean, she is an extremely risk-averse politician, and I think this is a fundamental point about Le Pen. I mean, she is ultimately a French politician. If you went all the way back to people like Clemenceau or Jaurès or de Gaulle, they were not just politicians. I mean, they were, titanic figures. Le Pen isn't in that league.
Okay, how do you think it's going to go? Just to wrap up
I think, as I said, I think at the end of the day, because the labels in France mean so much. I mean, it's impossible to understate how much they mean in France. I think it's going to be very difficult to persuade enough of Mélenchon's voters to vote for Le Pen or to abstain to enable her to win. However, I have to say this, the anger in France is not to be underestimated. And the focus of that anger is Macron. It's not Le Pen. So, it depends. Do those voters who voted for Mélenchon, that 22%, are they so angry that, they're prepared to, for once, put aside the ideological label, look at the policies, and hit at the man who they see as the embodiment of the elitist, globalist establishment that is pushing them down, grinding them down? Or do they still follow that tradition which has been so embedded in French society, like concrete almost, which is that if you belong to the left, you cannot vote for the right? We'll just have to see. I mean, I think on balance, history tells us it will be the second, and I still expect ultimately that it will be the second. But, these are, interesting times. And as I said, if there's a moment when that breakthrough might come, it might be in this election. I'm going to add one thing, actually. If Le Pen does win, even if she is the rather, shall we say, conventional figure that I've come to the view that she actually is, it will still be an extraordinary event in French history. I mean, it will be a moment when France will change, even in spite of Le Pen, rather than because of her. Because if the French are prepared to take the step of actually voting someone like Le Pen into the presidency, I mean, that will be a massive psychological shift within French society. And France, being France, it could set in train all sorts of things which are very difficult to work out how they will be. The French deep state, which is enormous, will work against her just as they did against Donald Trump. But bear in mind, she's got lots of support within other institutions within French society. The French military, for example, have been fairly outspoken. It's very difficult to know how things will turn out. So this could be, just might be, a seminal election for France, but don't count on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we got 2 weeks, so a lot can happen in 2 weeks.
We've got 2 weeks, yeah.
Maybe they'll uncover some French soldiers stuck in that Mariupol steel factory.
Well,
that would change things up.
If they, well, it would. I mean, I can't imagine that would do any good to Macron if it turns out to be the case. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. I'm just saying, it's 2 weeks. There's a lot that can happen.
2 weeks
in either direction. All right, we'll leave the video. We'll leave the video there. The Duran.locals.com. And if you're watching this from Rumble, you will see a red maroon button up top. Click that button to get taken directly to our locals community and the Duran shop. Use the code GOODDAY on checkout and get 10% off all merchandise from the Duran shop. There's the mug, and that's the code. Take care.